Hi, Lois, we got you.
Hi, are we supposed to have our video off?
Yes, right now. Video unmuted.
Okay, so only when we start presenting is when we'll turn on our video, right?
Yeah, they'll give us instructions.
Okay, thanks.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, How to Unlock the Power of Prison Education. Today's webinar is brought to you free of charge from our friends at Essential Education. And today we have Dan Griffith, who's going to share a couple of words with us. Dan?
Thanks, James. Appreciate it. Hello, everybody. Let me just share my screen real quick so I can pull this up and go to full screen mode. I just wanted to say, this area is really important to us at Essential Education. We work with a number of state correction agencies, implementing our programs both online and offline, as many of them are transitioning to online. For me personally, this area is really important. 3 years ago, I spent 7 months of my life in basic law enforcement training and now serve as a reserve deputy in my county. And so, bringing education to people so that they can change their lives and impact their communities in a positive way is really one of the key reasons why I wanted to go back and get involved in law enforcement. So at Essential Education, we have a number of tools, our adult basic education courses and our high school equivalency courses that are available both offline and online. And we know that a number of states are moving towards online implementations. We've worked with several of the tablet providers to deliver that. Would love to give you demos or any other information you might have about the programs and how they can impact learners. We also, let's see if I can get this thing to advance, have a series of print materials. Our Adult Basic Ed series is 21 books in math, reading, and writing, aligned to both the CASA Schools test and the TABE 11-12 test. They're sold in 10 packs, and if you're in an online environment, they also include links to our online courses. If not, you can buy the 10 packs without the virtual tutor connection at a discounted rate. And then we have our high school equivalency series. Those books are about 400-page workbooks aligned to the HSE assessments. So they're much bigger print material for you. And then finally, we have a whole bunch of resources for educators, from our CCR roadmap to our curriculum guides. We just launched these MSG Accelerator handbooks, which are pacing guides that are just exceptional in helping you plan how to move a student as quickly as possible through EFL levels. And you can get any of those by going to our website, essentialed.com/educator. And dash resources, or if you just get to the essentialed.com/educator site, you'll find your way around. There's all kinds of free resources and tools for you there. So we thank you for all that you do in corrections education. We know what an impact it has on people's lives and their families, and we're honored to be able to partner with you in that and with COABE in bringing professional development webinars like the one today to all of you. So thank you very much.
We are back, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Abramowitz. I am proud board member of COABE and chair of the Prison Literacy Committee, and I'm proud to bring to you today a great program on how to unlock the power of prison education. We have a number of great speakers today and so much to cover. I'm hoping that we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers, so feel free to throw them in the chat box and we'll try to get them at the end and open the door up to that. What I would like to do is right now get my screen shared with everybody so we can call Stephen. For all the speakers, if you can introduce yourself and to give a little bit about where you're from, that might help everyone get some context about what you're about to talk about. And I'm just gonna real quickly share my screen here so that we can get going. And then if you can give me a heads up on your next slide, I'd appreciate that from all the presenters today. And we look forward to a great program. So Steve, it's all up to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for all your help, and everybody else, and welcome. We have, I guess, almost 700 people signed up for this today, so that's terrific. On this next slide, you can see the names of the people who will present, and pretty much in the order that we're going to do it, and they will give a brief introduction to themselves as they come on. In the end, Gary Moore could not make it. He's tied up with the American Correctional Association, so I'll present his slides, but everybody else is on, so appreciate that. So Jeff, next slide, if you could. So we're not going to talk in depth about the paper, How to Unlock the Power of Prison Education. I'm going to talk about the issues that are in it. In the process of doing this paper, I worked with a good number of people, some of whom are on this panel. Lois Davis, Stefan Labulio are here today. Unfortunately, during the time I did the paper, two of the folks died. John Galley was a mentor of mine in corrections for years and very big on correctional standards, and he died about a year ago. And John Linton, who folks in this field know very, very well, also died. It's very hard to have two people in one summer that you have to give eulogies for at their funeral. So I dedicate the paper to them. And John Nally from Indiana, director of Indiana, gave us a lot of help, as did Michelle Tolbert. So let's, and then I just want to mention that the research that you'll see a lot about, there are two major resources here. One is the PIOC study that Erwin Kirsch can talk about a little bit, and then Lois will talk about the RAND study. In the paper, we covered a lot of other things, but these were essential for the content. Jeff, next slide. Okay, so there's the order of today. I'm gonna, I think Jeff we're ready for Erwin on the next slide, and then we'll go from there, okay?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for signing up for this webinar. And Steve, thank you for the opportunity to participate on this panel. Steve asked me if I would take about 5 minutes at the beginning to provide a bit of context around why we at ETS commissioned a paper on prison education. So I think, next slide, Jeff. I think in order to answer that, I will need to first say something about my role at ETS. I direct the Center for Global Assessment at ETS. It's in the Research and Development Division. And among my responsibilities, I serve as the International Project Director for PIAC. In this role, I have responsibility for the development, the implementation, and the analysis of the PIAC survey data. I also oversee a policy research center, which for the last dozen years or so has developed and published papers on issues associated with opportunity in America. As part of our policy work, we have relied on PIAC and other national and international data to help us understand both the distribution of adult skills in the US and elsewhere, as well as their connections to life outcomes. Next slide. One of the key findings from the PIAC data is the fact that although we have seen increases in educational attainment, including rates of high school completion, participation in post-secondary education, and completion of post-secondary degrees, including the earning of certifications, the PIAC data clearly indicate that we have not seen similar increases in skills. Researchers within our center have examined skills among our millennial population, and these are young adults 16 to 34 years of age at the time of PIAC, and who are, according to the data, the most educated cohort in terms of years of schooling of any cohort in our country. Yet the data showed that some 50% had low or very low literacy skills on PIAC, and 60% were found to have low or very low numeracy skills. What's somewhat troubling is the fact that these levels of performance are occurring at a time when the demands for higher level skills are increasingly required for many types of jobs and for everyday life. Probably won't surprise anyone on the webinar if I also say that among the incarcerated population, the percentage of those with limited skills are even higher. So according to the PIAC data, some 64% of the incarcerated population reported having a high school diploma or credential, and another 34% indicated that they had not yet completed high school. Among the high school completers, some 63% were found to perform at low or very low levels of literacy. And among non-high school completers, this percentage increased from 63 to 91%. Part of what is interesting to me about the performance of these two groups is the fact that about the same percentage, 44% compared to 42%, demonstrated low skills on literacy, while the major difference among those with very low skills ranged from 26% from 26 to 28%. That is, what I'm trying to say is that 23% of those who completed high school demonstrated very low skills, compared with 49% who reported not having a high school credential. So we might ask ourselves, does this really matter? Does it really matter where you are in the literacy distribution or in the numeracy distribution? Well, when we further examine the data, we find that there are many subgroups in our society that are being left behind in terms of their ability to fully participate in our society. And I think the recent pandemic has sort of put a strain or shined a light on just how bad things are for many people in this country. And what we have found in the data is that insufficient levels of key foundational skills like literacy and numeracy is a very important indicator. But by that I mean that the more literacy and the more numeracy skills one has, the more likely they are to have better outcomes in the labor force, better outcomes in terms of health, and better connections with social outcomes, that is civic engagement and other kinds of outcomes. Last slide, please. So given the growing importance of education and skills in our society, and the fact that the National Center for Education Statistics has provided funding to include a nationally representative sample of the incarcerated population in their 2014 PIAC assessment, I felt that it was appropriate to develop a policy paper which would focus on the incarcerated population, and thought Stephen would be one of the best people in the country to write about these issues. So let me stop there and turn things back over to Steve.
Okay. So thank you, Erwin. I really appreciate you asking me to do this paper. Just a little background on myself. I spent most of my professional life in Maryland administering programs for academic programs in the Maryland prison system, and then later also the juvenile system. And also at the same time worked for the Correctional Education Association, overlapping, and was executive director for 29 years. And so we did a lot of work. I know Correctional Education Association is an affiliate of COABE now, so many of you may be members there as well. Since I retired about 5 years ago from CEA, and in the state a little bit earlier than that. I've worked as a reentry education advocate for Cure National, which advocates for programs across the world, really, but also here in the United States. And also, more recently last year, I've always worked with the Barbara Bush Foundation, but they have now put together a group. Some who the panelists here are on that group, of working group of correctional education people. And we've helped Barbara Bush Foundation put together a 5-year plan, which includes correctional education. So within a month or so, that paper will be out, and we'll be sharing that with COABE members as well. Next slide, please. I'm not going to say much about PIAC because Erwin just laid out some of the issues. I mean, basically what he's saying is the correctional population, even with high school diplomas and high school equivalency diplomas or certificates, are not doing as well as their counterparts in society generally who have those same kind of credentials. But we're not really measuring that very much, even with all the good testing we do right now. So PIAC is an important study we haven't paid enough attention to. And so I won't go back over this other than to say that 64% of the population, incarcerated population, has, or 2/3 of them have skills that measured by PIAC that fall below what we would be deemed necessary for success today, leading to higher education or labor market success. Next slide, please. Thank you. A little other background, just from correctional statistics. Much of this is from the paper that I wrote. There were 875,000 adults paroled from federal and state institutions at the end of 2016. We don't have data readily available for the last few years. There's always a lag, but things have not changed that much. Almost 2/3 of people are rearrested within 3 years, and so then they have such poor access to education and job opportunities during imprisonment. There are many people who never get to participate in education because we just don't have enough resources, and resources have dropped. And over the last 2 decades, less money is being invested by state in most states in correctional education. And next slide, please. So in addition to the 2/3 of the folks who have certificates, high school equivalency or high school diploma, and who have lower level skills, there is another 1/4 of the incarcerated individuals who don't have those and have those certificates and have even less rudimentary skills, literacy skills. So I want to pay a lot of attention to that, and the work that I'm going to be doing is over the next year or two, trying to write about the situation and how we can kind of estimate who these people are and reach them more effectively. Next slide, please. And then the RAND study, which Lois will talk about, also published 2014, and there's follow-ups, and she'll give you the data. But until RAND came along, we always said that education made a difference in people's lives. Well, we couldn't measure it, and we couldn't say for sure if it was a significant statistically, and RAND with their study proved that. So it's kind of accepted in corrections now that if you go to school, whether it's career or academic education while you're incarcerated, your chances of recidivating are much less. Originally it was estimated about 43%. Now after some follow-up studies, 28%, but that still is one of the most important research findings. Lots of other programs have significance for the future, but education has as much significance as mental health or substance abuse programming. Thank you. Next slide. So in the paper we talked about we need an incentive to get people to invest in prison education, and so it's even though it's widely known that it's better, that education is associated with better reentry outcomes, including reduced recidivism. It's a boon to public safety and to budgets because it saves money in the future. But society just doesn't seem to be interested generally in investing as it should. So So part of the answer is, part of the answer is why has this happened? Some of it is because society has invested a lot more in substance abuse and mental health programming more in recent years than they have in education. So it's really up to us as researchers, educators, and members of this field to start making our case and argue this case to our state and federal legislators and to the media. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff, who can introduce himself and take it from there.
And thanks, Stephen. And I am really excited to be here today and to be able to help facilitate this. My name is Jeff Abramowitz. I'm an executive director at Jeff's Human Services in Philadelphia. And I'm also on the COABE board and chair of the Prison Literacy Committee across the country. And I'm really excited because of a lot of things that are happening in this space right now, but mostly because I'm able to bring my experience, my life experiences to the table to share my journey. And as not only an educator, an administrator, but also as a returning citizen, I've lived and gone through the correctional education system behind the walls. And now I've at a position where I'm actually helping to actually effectuate change in the system. And one of the things real message that I want to deliver today is that as educators and administrators across the country, I'm hoping that we can all put on a new pair of glasses, that we can start seeing the world a little bit differently, that we can look at from a perspective from the eyes of our students and from those that have been incarcerated and gone through this journey and how we might be able to service them better. We know that there are over 44,000 documented barriers to returning citizens and men and women that are navigating a criminal past. Everything from employment, education, housing, borrowing loans, licensing, and the list goes on and on and on. But we're also faced with the harsh reality that, many jobs that are in the current marketplace are facing automation and at risk for automation removal and elimination. And that it's important for us to concentrate on educating the men and women that are going through the criminal justice system and helping them find a true career pathway. There was recently a study done by Gallup and sponsored by the Barbara Bush Foundation, which acknowledged that we are losing almost $2.2 trillion per year in gross national product strictly because of low literacy in our adult population. Just to quantify it, that's about 153 million Americans that are adult age that are have low literacy levels. And the harsh reality in our country also is that somewhere between 70 and 100 million people today are in our criminal justice database, and they are facing a lot of those same challenges. So why is education so important? It's clear that, people with low skilled adults are 8 times more likely to be incarcerated, that taking classes inside of the prison walls where reentry really should begin gives someone a 43% better chance of not going back into prison. And we need to face the reality that, in 63% of all jobs in the marketplace are going to require something more than a high school diploma. And that's going to require education. And that's going to require us investing in things like the REAL Act, where we're talking about the Pell Grant window opening up, investing in training and skill licensing, ITA training and IET programming, where we're really concentrating on giving people a true career pathway, a skill. The photograph that I've shown today is a young man that's out at Edwin's in Cleveland, where I had an opportunity to dine in this 5-star restaurant. And not only did I get to have some of the best banana Fosters in my life, but I got to see something that was priceless. And that was a young man who came home from prison and learned a skill set to make bananas Foster. And he had this smile on his face when he got done making that was absolutely priceless. Engaging employers in this whole process of education and training is pivotal, and upskilling our population so that we can provide better services and better and really give people a true career pathway. So I'm proud to be part of this project, work with COABE and the Barbara Bush Foundation, and I'm going to pass it off and to our next speaker.
Yeah, let me introduce Lois very quickly. And just one thing that we should have mentioned at the beginning, we're going to try to go 5 minutes each or so. So at the end, you can ask us questions on the chat. So So with that, Lois, will you please introduce yourself?
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to present to you all. This is my first time interacting with COABE. I'm a senior researcher at RAND, and I led the RAND study that really looked nationally at what we know about the effectiveness of correctional education programs in the United States. So there was a couple of references to some of the key results, but what was interesting at that time is that how hungry the field was for even just basic data about that question. So the fact that our meta-analysis was able to show that if you participated in any type of correctional education program while incarcerated, whether it be, for example, adult basic education, GED preparation, CTE programs, or post-secondary education, you had a reduction in your odds of recidivating of 43%. That was a huge reduction. When we looked at just a very simple estimate of the cost effectiveness, as Steve referenced it, we were able to show that if you look at the direct costs alone, every dollar you're spending on these programs, you're saving about $4 to $5 in reincarceration costs. So, and that's a dramatic cost saving. So it's been interesting is how that information has really helped inform the field and helped inform policy discussions at the state and federal levels about why it's important to invest in these programs. At the time, that was a study that was funded under the Second Chance Act by the Department of Justice. And one of our charges was to come out with a list of what are a list of promising and evidence-based programs in this field. And we were unable to do that. And the reason why is because the evidence base it was not there. It's improving somewhat, but what I'm going to be talking about is where we stand in terms of trying to get a better handle so that we can make smart decisions about these programs and allocating budgets. Next slide, please. So as a researcher, you often talk about we need to get inside the black box, in this case of correctional education programs. And what I mean by that is when we looked at the research studies, evaluation studies that have been done, what we saw was that they could tell us information about somebody participated in a program and whether or not they completed it and just a very vague sense of what they got while incarcerated. But the key issue is that we actually need to understand a lot more about those programs in order to understand what elements are associated with effective programs. And what I mean by that is we need basic information about dosage. Does it matter that you participate in a program 3 times a week, or is it, do you really need 3 times a week plus tutoring? How long? Are we talking about several months? Are we talking about a very short course, etc.? The other thing is we are interested in such things as understanding the mode of instruction. The COVID crisis right now is really pushing people to think more and more about using online and tablets for instruction, but we really have to understand much better how effective programs are that are just purely online versus instruction versus blended learning programs. So that's the kind of information, if you're a correctional education director, a policymaker trying to make decisions, that you need to know. Next slide, please. And these are kind of the basic questions that anyone would want to know, and I often get asked these questions. For example, what dosage is associated with effective programs and how does it vary for different types of students? And who benefits most from the different types of correctional education programs? The work that Stephen has led with the Barbara Bush Foundation in this area really clearly illustrated how the need to not just simply think about people earning a GED, for example, or a CTE certificate, but also are they addressing deficits in terms of literacy and numeracy skills, as those skills development is an important part of the ultimate success of individuals. We'd like to know which programs are associated with higher pre and post-release returns with the emphasis on college programs. People often ask me, do people that participate in college programs fare better than if they participated solely in CTE programs or GED programs? What we know is that for college programs, if you participate in them, you're half as likely to recidivate. but we can't do that comparison to other types of programs because the data just is not there yet. I mentioned again that we really want to understand what models of curriculum and instructional delivery are most effective, and then what principles, for example, from adult education learning may be applicable to correctional education that we can draw upon. Next slide, please. When we set out to look at the effectiveness of correctional education programs and do our meta-analysis, the initial study, we were looking at over 30 years of research. Our hope was to be able to really look at different educational outcomes. But unfortunately, most of the outcomes that were being measured had to do with recidivism. And that's in the sense that that's where it's easiest to get that data. But we know that recidivism is a very distal measure of program effectiveness, and it also, a lot of things affect recidivism. So there's really a much better, a greater need now to think about if we truly want to understand these programs and inform where we're going to be investing our resources and efforts, we need more proximal indicators, such things as measuring changes in motivation, measuring literacy gains, for example, development of concrete skills, and also thinking about how to measure academic progress in addition to academic achievement. So with that, I'll turn it back to Stephen.
Thank you, Lois, and I really appreciate your work. It's just seminal in the field. Now I'd like to turn to Stefan Laboglio, who will introduce himself and talk about reentry. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon all. So pleased to be with you. I began my correctional career in 1992 running a correctional education program. And for the last 28 years have been in mostly jail systems and now serve as a consultant in supporting the reentry of individuals back into society. Really, my quick presentation tries to analyze why are we thinking right now? Why does it seem that there's been a retrenchment, if not collapse, of correctional education, given the strong arguments and presentations that have just been laid out by Erwin, Steve, Jeff, and Lois. We know the great need. It's documented by the PIOC study. We know that it's effective. Yet we have alarming statistics now in 2020. We see that at the federal level, the Federal Bureau of Prison awarded last year 3,000 secondary diplomas, where 5 years ago it was 6,000. In state and local facilities, we also see similar significant reductions in GED awards. We've heard from the field that resources for teachers and materials and program space have been severely limited. And so my question really is, why is that the case, given that over the last 20 years, we've had remarkable support for reentry? Indeed, support for reentry has spanned 4 administrations, including the current one. We've seen $1 billion more spent by the federal government and more than that by state and local governments to support thousands of reentry programs. You've heard some of these programs under the names of the Second Chance Act and the Workforce Investment Act programs. Yet when we look at these programs and we look at the innovations and what we have learned, what we've learned that works to support individuals to be successful when they are released, we haven't seen this effort really embolden and support correctional education. And I sort of asked them my question, why, and the slide that's presented to you attempts to answer that question. One is that correctional education has not been perceived as urgent as programs such as substance use disorder treatments or mental health or employment. And that's a challenge to our field and to the many correctional educators. How do we make correctional education more urgent? It's perceived as more costly and bureaucratic to run. Many programs can be run by staff that don't have the training and credentials as teachers, programs that can be run in day rooms rather than classrooms with materials and computers. We also have a perception that correctional education is not sufficiently integrated into workforce. Oftentimes decisions are made of, does an individual go into employment readiness program or correctional education, not recognizing that the correctional education can affect the long-term life trajectory of individuals. Noah shortly will talk about, we've rolled out technology in a confusing way that really hasn't taken advantage of the opportunities of correctional education. And then also the last piece is we are thrilled that we may be at the verge of reversing the 1994 decision that prevents individuals from getting Pell Grants. And we salute that. We also want to see support for the adult literacy and secondary programs as well. Most individuals in our nation's prisons and jails cannot enroll in a college program. So there needs to be that focus. So next slide, Jeff. So if we were to take advantage of the benefits of what we've learned from 20 years, thousands of programs, billions of dollars, how would we reshape correctional education? One is we would do an immediate intake, screening, and assessment for the needs of individuals as they come into our institutions. We wouldn't wait a week, a month, 6 months before assessing what their educational needs are. We wouldn't wait for them to send a slip of paper indicating their interest in GED. We'd make it a matter of course that when individuals are coming in, just as we are now increasingly assessing for risk and mental health concerns and substance use disorders, we'd measure for educational needs. We would do rapid enrollment and again, not wait for a certain Goldilocks perfect time when individuals can be enrolled in educational programs. Individuals take different paths through correctional education, through correctional systems, and we need to attach them to programs quickly. Those programs have to be tailored to their educational needs. And we need the quality teachers and the quality programs and the technology to effectively change the trajectory of these individuals. And lastly, as individuals are approaching release, we need to involve the community colleges, the adult basic education community in the neighborhoods, and make sure that individuals know where they can go to get their correctional education continuation support and their degrees. And then accountability for quality and performance is something necessary for all of us. So with that, I'll say there's a lot we can learn. I think we're concerned about where we are in correctional education, but we know that we have a dedicated cadre of people around the country who want to make correctional education just vital to reentry. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And I want to turn this over to Noah Friedman, who will introduce himself. I'm looking at through the chat room. There are a lot of questions, so when we get finished, we'll be going to those. Noah.
Great. Can everyone hear me there? Hi.
Yes.
Let's see. I don't know if my...
You're good, Noah. You're good.
You're good. You're good.
Is that working any better?
Yeah, you're good.
You're fine.
All right, great. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Noah Friedman. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Nucleos. At Nucleos, we're focused on helping correctional agencies and reentry agencies educate, rehabilitate, and track learning outcomes more effectively. Next slide, please. So one of the big questions that we're looking at is how can correctional education leverage technology to help address some of the questions that are the largest questions in the field right now. And the earlier panelists have alluded to a few of these questions. On a very high level, we need to get more people enrolled in programs. There's a study from Vera Institute that shows about 1 to 2% of people who are behind bars now are enrolled in college courses, whereas as high as 70% might be eligible for some post-secondary education. Without integrating technology, it seems very difficult that we'll be able to bring in both the access at a high enough level that everyone needs, as well as to be able to bring in the range and breadth of content. So we have a few recommendations for how technology can help address issues of access, as well as address issues of being able to the points Lois made, be able to get data on those outcomes and see which programs are effective in which settings. So these are a few recommendations here. One is just, I think, some of the high level goals are we want to bring in the widest range of relevant content and courses and make them available. The job market is changing rapidly, and there's a lot of different skill sets that we need to make sure people have access to if they're going to be successful. We want to bring in modern web-based technology. That's where the majority of high quality education and training programs live today. And you can't really have a high quality education today without a technological component. It's just not relevant in the 21st century. And any system that does come in needs to take into account the reality of how quickly our labor market is changing, the skills that people need to succeed are changing, and it needs to be built in an expandable way. Next slide, please. So I wanted to focus first on some of the challenges specifically related to education technology in correctional education. And one of the biggest points for me is really the difference between being able to embrace secure, filtered online learning versus relying on fully offline systems. And this is a big change, and it's a change that's happening now across many of the biggest systems in the country. States such as California, Florida, Oregon, Wisconsin, and North Carolina are all embracing different filtered internet solutions to bring in digital learning into their systems. And we believe that this is going to keep increasing because this is the trend of where learning programs are going. It's critical, though, that digital learning tools aren't just dropped off in what we might call a tech drop. They need to be integrated into rehabilitative case management plans, and they also need to take advantage of teachers, instructors, and case managers, and be blended into the work that they're doing. Everything needs to come onto a learning record. Some states are doing this really well. Others are looking to implement more systems. And the content that does come in, it really needs to be tied to pathways that lead to degrees or industry recognized certifications. And today, a lot of these elements are lacking. Next slide, please. So this is an older statistic. This is from a report that Lois, they actually pulled some of the data from Lois Davis's work with Rand, I believe. And this just gives an overview of where adoption is for access to the internet. So this is critical, and especially during the pandemic, we're seeing that there's a wider embrace. Our company's been working with some different correctional facilities to implement access to remote courses, but also the ability to communicate over video conference with classes as well. Next slide, please. So along with some of these challenges, I think there's some real opportunities here that I want to highlight as well. And what we see is that there is a much greater acceptance of adopting the internet in a filtered and secure way to give incarcerated learners access to the huge amount of the best quality content that's out there. We're seeing network infrastructure come in a lot of states, and online learning is becoming more mainstream across our whole society now. And while the rest of the world has turned to online learning during the pandemic, classrooms have been shut with no alternative in most of our correctional systems. And people all realize that this is a challenge. There are solutions today that can help correctional agencies bring these types of programs in. With support from Pell Grants and Pell Grant reform with higher education, there'll also be an even greater opportunity to leverage support for bringing in blended learning programs. And one other thing I want to highlight is we're seeing in a lot of correctional systems as well that there's a growing acknowledgement that we need dedicated learning devices. It's not sufficient to say have a communication device where people might be paying to access some generic education content that doesn't really constitute a learning program. People need to have a framework around the content that they're connecting to and a case management plan and dedicated education devices such as dedicated tablets or Chromebooks. Computer labs have been around for a while, but having the devices is critical and can be part of a plan to allow agencies to cost effectively expand education options while using blended in-person and digital to expand access while saving on costs at the same time. Next slide, please.
That's
Oh, Well, that's all.
That's
So
it.
that's just an overview of where we are today, and happy to follow up with any other questions. And thank you, everyone.
Okay. Thank you, Noah. Gary Moore, the president of the American Correctional Association, was going to try to present, but he is doing work today with training of wardens. So he sent his slides, and I've talked with him. I've known Gary for a pretty long time. He started as a correctional teacher in Ohio many years ago and worked his way up through the system, became director eventually of the Ohio Department of Rehab and Corrections. And it's just a terrifically pro-education leader. And with his job at ACA now as the president, we're looking forward to pushing the value of education even more. His first slide, he has 2 or 3 he gave me. He says, you should know the value of education for the operation of prisons. And that education, the GED, obtaining a GED results in a 23% reduction. Lois talks about a 28, so in that range. And it also, from a warden's viewpoint, demonstrates the reduction of violence inside the prisons. Then he also talks about know and communicate your performance. If you don't have, without having to research the numbers, do you know how many GEDs have been achieved this year? Does your facility agency know this number? He told me that when he became director, he asked all the wardens in Ohio, how many GEDs did you have last year? And a good number of them did not know. They had to go ask the Ohio Central School System, which is part of the whole system there, what those were. And then he told me, he said, I want them doubled next year. So it takes getting leadership to do that. And he said it was very easy for them to double because they just focused on it. And that was really a striking thing for him to tell me. Next slide, please. He talks about working to integrate the educational assessments as part of the agency classification instrument. Stefan Labolia was talking about this, and it's a big issue right now, getting education to be more part of the reentry and classification system. And Gary says if it's separate from classification, classification instrument used for placement, education will lose out to security, medical, and mental health every time. He also told me ACA standards are just loaded with quality standards for mental health, for example, in substance abuse programs, but the education standards haven't changed for years. And so we're talking about, and he's going to support us to have ACA look at their education standards, maybe even work to make some of them mandatory, like special education for those who are younger. It's a federal requirement, so why shouldn't it be, a mandatory standard? Next slide, please. And so then he talked about how to promote education, and he talks about KPI tracking, and it's the key performance indicator tracking that makes sure that education indicators are fully represented there. And if your agency doesn't use KPI tracking, find ways to propose your agency to get specific indicators. Corrections is going to, correctional leaders, wardens, and administrators are going to follow what they have, the data they have to collect. We have to get a better handle on getting them involved with collecting educational data, which Lois talked about. So with that, I'll leave Gary's presentation and thank him for his personal help. And so the next slide, what I'd like to do is sort of wrapping up here before we go to questions is the paper that I did for ETS, Educational Testing Services, talked about a lot of stuff we covered today. And we made a number of recommendations in that paper. Restoring Pell Grants, improving correctional education reentry programs, as we just mentioned, amending some of the federal and state laws. The group of us right here on this panel are working with Senate and legislative congressional staff to to maybe change some of the current legislation and amend it to have more money for correctional ed or include correctional ed and reentry programming. We even asked a basic question recently, and the letter is going to go off in the Senate and the congressional offices to the 3 companies that provide HiSAT, TASC, and GED. They asked them how many GEDs we've had in the last 10 years. We don't know. Nobody's collecting and making this data public anymore. GED testing does not put out an annual report since 2014. So we don't know how many GEDs are being, and states don't often disaggregate this data. So if they tell you how many GEDs are in a particular state, you might not know how many came about in the jails and prisons in those jurisdictions. So we're asking those questions, and hopefully we'll get some good answers. That people at GED, TASC, and HiSET have been terrifically supportive of trying to see what they can get to us. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, good. So thank you. I just want to wrap this up before we go to questions. So Jeff and I will try to handle these questions a little bit, since he's been a terrific facilitator here. The paper that How to Unlock the Power of Prison Education is available at this link, and we're going to send that. That's going to be sent out to everybody, or available to everybody who's on this presentation, so you can download it and read it for yourself. And also, COABE, after another day or two, will be able to post this seminar on their website. You'll be able to access it and review it again. So I'd like to thank everybody. Let's do one more slide here, and I guess that's it. So I'd like to thank everybody who's on the panel right now. But Jeff, you want to help me with this? I'm looking at questions that
Sure.
are in that room there.
Thanks, Steve. That was awesome. So yeah, this is the rare opportunity we really have to address some questions live with some really tremendous experts on the phone. But there's one question that popped out at me, and I'll try to get to a few of these. Steve, if you see some, you can chime in as well. The first one that caught me was the online options are not possible in our correctional centers due to the programming and fears of access to the internet. Any suggestions on how to advocate for this practice and curriculum options for corrections? So really from a technical standpoint, anyone can want to chime in? This may be Noah's ground and some others.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in here. So just to start, there's a lot of fear with bringing in internet access. And when states are talking about bringing in internet access, it's not about giving people access to Facebook or anything like that. It's highly filtered, and people are using allow lists to only ensure that certain content comes on. Our company, for instance, Nucleos, has a learning platform which has a full middleware solution to create a holistic learning platform around any dynamic set of web content. We can set that digital boundary around access to specific programs and also access to block off certain features in those programs, such as messaging, discussion boards, etc. We aren't the only ones out there that do this, but these type of technologies today are safe, secure, and are implemented at a mass scale by other correctional agencies. So I encourage everyone to look beyond that initial fear and really look into the question of not can we do it, but how can we do this and ensure the level of security that we need.
Awesome. There's a question from Warren that Warren threw out there. Yeah, I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Jeff leads the COABE hackathon group and talking about technology. So I think one of the things we need to do within COABE and whatever other associations with is to push our legislators at the state level or federal level to provide some grants in these areas for solutions that work, that are competitive, but that work so with working with COABE and Correctional Education Association, whatever else, we need to be proactive about that. And we're working, those of us who are involved with the Barbara Bush Foundation are trying to work with Congress to maybe put some grants out there in the future to encourage internet connections, secure internet connection.
So I know, Steve, it's one of the high priorities of the COABE, the Prison Literacy Committee, and one of the things we talk about all the time of how we can go about making those changes in a more meaningful way, both at a federal and a state level. And there are a lot of states that are jumping in, but it takes our administrators and advocates that are listening today to jump in the pool and to say, we need this to happen. It's worth the investment and it's worth the effort. Stefan, did you have something?
I would add to what you've said. I think 20 years ago, there was a legitimate concern. It doesn't really exist right now. Now it's just a matter of having administrators make this a priority. We have the security, and we also have examples of systems that have introduced the internet. In a pre-release center that I ran for 11 years, we introduced the internet in 2006 to all sorts of fears and concerns, and had nary a problem with it for the 11 years that I was there.
There's a great question from Warren about data. So I believe Einstein was right when he said a man without data is just another man with an opinion. And his question is, why can't tracking systems that assess the progress of reentry success in housing, employment, continuing education, and recidivism be used for correction data? And I'm curious, I might kind of want to get maybe Lois's take on all this, because I know that tracking this data is so important. And I wonder your slant on it from an organization that tries to get this data together.
Well, first of all, what I would say is, if you look across correctional systems in various states, they vary widely in how good a job they do in even recording this data. So recording data, for example, administrative data about what programs people receive, much less information about program completion and progress. So that's one of the things. There's a need to improve the standardization of how we collect these data. When it comes to reentry, there's really some real barriers there. Correctional systems are not allowed to track people on the outside. And so there's a real need to think about then how do you marry kind of the needs of seeing what's happening out in the community so we can really understand the effectiveness of these programs and how well people are faring versus these kind of prohibitions against tracking them. So it falls off into the role of researchers to try to put up for a specific project a real mechanism to do that. But that's a case-by-case basis. So it's clear we really need to think more systematically about how do we improve our data reporting, data collection systems.
Awesome. Thanks, Lois.
I thought that Gary's slide and was kind of key. You have to get into the correctional data system in the state or facility that you're, whatever systems they're using, and we need to do more work with getting some guidelines from American Correctional Association and others on that too. But so,
Steve, there's a question for you. I think is interesting. Have you seen any models that you just talked about that are done well in the jail settings?
In terms of technology or just general models?
I'm not sure. It's from Angela, but I think maybe a little bit of both.
Okay, well, I've spent a fair amount of time back and forth over the years, and in recent times even tutoring myself in jails, working with the education programs. There are some things. I mean, this one's a little old, but iPathways could be used. It's a direct connection for high school equivalency out of Illinois, the state of Illinois. All the prisons are on. It's a big land. The state's a big land, and they take that. They can go back to a community college and continue their high school equivalency and other courses. So there are, and that was Firewall that we had at a local jail here in Maryland, and it worked fine for 5 years. Nobody ever got out there anywhere else. I right now I'm working on an interesting project with the PD Green program, which is college students come in and tutor. I had them coming into the jail, and they would come in and volunteer a semester, and they'd be screened, and so they would come in, and now they can't come in because of COVID. So we're looking to get a grant for this 50 different institutions across the eastern states that they're on to provide tutoring in conjunction with the education program in the jail or the prisons. So the tutors will actually be online. And so we've got some options to work on with that, and we're doing that. So Stefan looks like he has something, and I think Noah has some models he could talk about.
We got about 2 minutes left, so Stefan.
Well, we can go over if people stay on, where we can go past the 60 minutes. So I'll be happy to continue it, but you and COE people can pull the string, whatever, turn off the lights, but
we'll give it a little bit. Let's try and get to some of these questions. Stefan, did you have something you wanted to add?
I would say Hamden County Correctional Center in Massachusetts has demonstrated sort of a 40-year support for correctional education. And interesting, in a time of COVID, they've maintained their educational programs. And even with their higher ed in 1994, when the rest of the country had its college education programs go down, they maintained theirs. So there's 3,000 jails. Some of them are doing some good work. Hamden, I point to as a good system. Montgomery County, Maryland, where I worked, I also point to as an excellent system.
Awesome. Noah, did you have something you want to chime in on?
You're on mute.
There we go. We've seen that Oregon Youth Authority has been a really interesting model for a full embrace of digital education programming using filtered internet and Chromebooks. They have students access Chromebooks from 4 to 6 hours per day. So, you know, there's a ton of challenges with adult systems, right? They can't all implement that same model in the same way, but I think that's a really interesting case to look at what some of the juvenile agencies are doing, since they're further ahead in the adoption of this technology.
Awesome.
San Francisco County Sheriff's Office is another one. They're using filtered internet systems and doing a great job there. And I'd be happy to follow up with anyone if they want to learn more about either of those.
So we're gonna wrap up in a second. There's two easy ones. One is that there's a question about the the paper and Steve's paper, how to get it. We'll be posting that paper on COABE's website. So we'll make sure that that COABE gets it up on their website on the prison literacy. And yeah, we had a great discussion today. So I want to thank everybody for joining in. There's also a poll that's popped up, and I hope that everybody will jump in and respond to the poll about what the what you got out of this, and did it meet or exceed your expectation? And we're really glad that that everybody jumped on today. Steve, any closing remarks?
Yeah, I saw a couple other questions. I'd love to get to many of them, but we just couldn't. It's amazing how many people had it. So let's keep this up and do some more things. I think what we ought to do is look for a future seminar on best programs and get people to submit them. But somebody asked if they could get the slides too. And
yeah, that's if they send an email to COABE, I will I'll do everything I can to get a copy of the slide deck to them.
Yeah. Okay. And also to me, if you see my email, sjstewart@gmail.com, I'll send you know, to those people who would like that too. So
Sounds
I
good.
appreciate everybody. I want to thank Jeff. Jeff has been a terrific facilitator. I want to thank Noah and Erwa and Stefan and Lois and the rest of the folks at COABE for sponsoring this. And correctional education is only going to prosper if we get involved. I know that's always hard. You're a state employee, and you know sometimes there's prohibitions and all that. But it's always been my experience in my own state and locally that if you step up and do something, you're heard. The legislators at the federal and the state level always tell me if they get 2 or 3 people who are very interested in the topic, that's a lot. It doesn't take much. And when you find somebody, get a sponsor, go for it. So, and then work together into professional associations. Without a professional association, forget it. The folks that are doing well with mental health and substance abuse at American Correctional Association are very active with that association. We are not. That association drives the field. So get involved with American Correctional Association as much as possible. And if anybody else wants to say something real quick, or if Jeff
Also,
allows us, because he's
just a special shout out to Essential Education, who was a sponsor of this through COABE. So thank you so much, Dan, for sponsoring it. We appreciate everybody jumping on today. I just want to be really mindful of everybody's time. I know people are busy. They have a lot of other meetings going on. And hopefully, if there's enough interest, we'll follow up with another workshop following up on the same topics of correctional education.
Well, I want everybody to be safe and keep your distance, and keep tuned on the internet, and we will get through all this. So have a wonderful weekend, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Panelists again. Bye now.